And you are here today to talk about the big announcement, which is a $12 billion deficit. You said the city has not seen something like this since the Great Depression. You said you were given a poison chalice by previous administrations. So on behalf of so many New Yorkers who heard that noise and that news, what is the answer to bring that budget now on time and on budget?
So I think first, as you said, this is a $12 billion fiscal deficit, right? The last time New Yorkers saw a fiscal crisis anywhere close to this was the Great Recession. And yet this actually eclipses that. This is of a greater deficit than we saw at that time. It's going to require an all-of-the-above approach.
This is PIX on Politics Daily with Dan Manarino.
Hi there, I'm Henry Rossoff, and welcome to PIX on Politics Daily. It has been quite a week in the New York City political landscape. The biggest story politically in the country, of course, is little-known Democratic Socialist Queens Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani. He's not so little known anymore. Coming back from just 1% in the polls in February, he has now apparently defeated former Governor Andrew Cuomo, who was the heavy favorite, and he has become the presumptive Democratic nominee for mayor. And in this town, in New York City, that makes him the heavy favorite to actually be the next mayor. It was a stunning development. And then later in the week, we saw Mayor Eric Adams declare as an independent candidate. He's now trying to bring in all of those moderate Democrats who went to support Cuomo, along with independent support, even some Republican support. And we're off to the races in the general election. I actually had the privilege of going one-on-one with Assemblyman Mamdani. Just a couple of days after his big election win. We talked about Mayor Adams entering the race. We talked about accusations he's facing that he would defund the police. And I really drilled down in on if he'd be willing to compromise to get some of his big promises done, like free buses, universal daycare, freezing the rent, if he would be pragmatic in his approach to leading the city. Let's take a listen to our conversation. Mr. Mamdani, thanks for taking a moment to join us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So on to the general election. You're the presumptive Democratic nominee. So Mayor Eric Adams made his declaration today. He said it was a contest between someone who believes in handouts, he's talking about you, and someone who believes in a hand up, he's talking about himself. What do you make of that?
You know, from the beginning of this campaign, I've said that I was running to defeat Eric Adams' second term. And there were many months where that was something carried by Andrew Cuomo, and now it's back to the original architect. And this is a mayor that has exacerbated a cost of living crisis for New Yorkers across the 5 boroughs. And I'm excited about the opportunity to remind New Yorkers that I'm running against the man who raised the rent for more than 2 million of them, the man who raised water bills to the highest they've been in 13 years, who supported Con Edison when they wanted to increase gas and electric rates by $65 a month. And my campaign is firmly focused on making the most expensive city in the United States of America affordable.
If I had to bottom line some of the concern we've seen out there since you became the presumptive nominee, it's how can this 33-year-old Democratic Socialist making these big promises actually run the city? So a couple of quick questions on that.
Please.
First of all, the governor says she's not raising taxes to pay for your agenda. If you don't get more revenue, which items can you still do immediately?
So to be clear, freezing the rent is something that requires no revenue from the state. It's been done 3 times before in the previous mayoral administration, but ultimately, in the same way that raising taxes on billionaires and corporations are currently described as a non-starter, our campaign was described as a non-starter many months ago. And what we've done is build a movement, the likes of which has very little precedent here in our city, and that's the very movement that's going to deliver us this agenda.
But let's try to get a sense of what it looks like when you're in there as mayor. Let's, for example, say you want to make all the buses free. You go to Albany, you engage with the MTA, you engage with the city council, and the consensus is, Mayor Mamdani, we can give you half the buses free right now. Is that the sort of deal we could expect you to make?
Ultimately, I'm looking to deliver for New Yorkers. I am wedded to the outcomes more than any kind of ideology, and those outcomes is delivering affordability. And when I think about the state legislature, when I think about the city council, and even the MTA, who have told me time and again when I've been in a state assembly member, is that if you find the money, we'll do the thing. And ultimately, $700 million is both significant and also has to be understood in the context of a $113 billion budget, a $252 billion state budget, and I'm confident we're going to get there.
But what I'm drilling in on is, are you willing to compromise? Not your values, but them saying, we got to do it this way. Is that a conversation you're willing to have?
Absolutely, because I know what it is that I'm fighting for, and also there are many different partnerships we have to build, and delivering something in its infancy is better than delivering nothing at all. My belief, I would just say, is that we will deliver these exact things. And I've also shown an ability to compromise as the state legislator when I was fighting to make all buses free, and we won a free bus pilot, where we made 5 bus routes free across New York City. And it showed us the exact results that have been driving our push to do it for every bus.
What about universal childcare? Just for your context, you're talking to the dad of a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old right now, so I'm pretty familiar with the ins and outs and the costs. How quickly could you get universal childcare up and running?
I think the first focus is to ensure that we are actually running our universal pre-K and 3K as effectively as we should be, because what we've seen from Eric Adams is him really kneecapping what has been some of the most successful examples of how local government can make life more affordable in this city. We have to extend that offer that the Adams administration has spoken about and actually make it sincere. He said that every child that wants a seat gets a seat, not mentioning that the child who lives in Astoria is being given a seat in Bay Ridge. We have to make it true. And what is so exciting about our proposal is it's one that extends that childcare for children as young as 6 weeks, and we start to build that over the course of this administration.
Let's talk a little bit about keeping the city safe, because I feel like that's the other major concern. People describe you as a defund the police guy. Fair or unfair, that's how they describe you right now. So let's ask the ultimate defund question that I could find, honestly. We're at about 33,500 cops right now. City's budgeted to 35,000 cops. Are you going to hire 1,500 more cops to bring us up to the budgeted level?
I have said throughout this campaign that I am not defunding the police, and I'm going to sustain the exact headcount that we have right now, and in fact make police officers...
So not bring it up to 35,000, we're going to stay at 33.5 approximately?
We're keeping the police officers we have, and we're looking to make their jobs easier. Because when I speak to officers, what I hear from them is a frustration about the fact that they signed up to join the force to take on serious crimes. And instead, on an annual basis, they're responding to 200,000 mental health calls. They are unable to respond to the same crimes we categorize in CompStat because we're asking them to do the work of social workers and mental health professionals. And as much as we talk about a head count, we're ignoring the fact that every month we lose 200 officers. We lose them, a leading reason being forced overtime. And this overtime is something that makes it difficult for police officers to have any kind of quality of life because they don't know when they're going home. And part of that is because we're asking them to do so many more jobs than they should be doing, which is focusing on these serious crimes.
And diving into your Department of Community Safety, which is a big part of what we were just talking about, yes. Doing the other jobs. If you put the outreach workers down there, if you put the social workers down there, and we see crime rise, will you also put more cops down there?
Ultimately, I am confident of the fact that the Department of Community Safety, it's not just something that is right, it's something that has been proven, evidence-based across the country, and that we will see crime not only drop, but also so much of what makes New Yorkers feel unsafe in the subway system isn't even being categorized as crime. It's near experiences. It's moments where they feel a precarity in their life as they move through that platform. We need to ensure that we are bringing homeless New Yorkers and New Yorkers experiencing mental health crises out of our subway system, connecting them with long-term care and actually responding to that as opposed to just trying to push them out of our view.
As you know, I'm the PIX11 poll guy, the numbers guy. I joke with you about crosstabs throughout this campaign. But as you're digesting the data from your election, what is interesting to you? What stands out to you about your coalition?
You know, ultimately that we have gone far beyond the neighborhoods you'd consider just to be progressive. We have won in the very neighborhoods that Donald Trump won in. We're speaking about Bath Beach, we're speaking about Bensonhurst, we're speaking about College Point, and ultimately this coalition is one that also looks similar to Eric Adams's in 2021, because the same neighborhoods he won by single digits, Harlem, Washington Heights, Bed-Stuy, we won them by double digits in this race, and we actually got more votes than he did through ranked choice just in the first round. And that shows a mandate for a city that should be affordable.
Mr. Mamdani, thank you very much.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much, sir.
Your time.
Always.
So what stood out to me there, Mr. Mamdani certainly ready to prosecute the case against Mayor Adams and fight hard through this general election. And then also he expressed some flexibility, again, not in his values, but in working with other people to accomplish his goals, to accomplish buses, to accomplish universal daycare. Where he was less flexible, his views on policing, particularly around the subways, which I asked a lot about. He really wants to see if this kinder, gentler approach with more social workers, more greeters, and more alternative policing resources in the subways works, and is not yet willing to more directly answer the question, what if it doesn't? Will the cops come back? He also will not expand the police force. And there was actually quite a bit of consensus in the Democratic primary on this, that specific number I mentioned, 35,000. Most of the candidates acknowledging Mr. Cuomo, Mr. Lander, Mr. Stringer, and so on, said we need to be at that policing level. Mr. Mamdani says he's content to let the NYPD kind of live about 1,500 officers fewer and seem to use those resources other places to address other forms of public safety. And I know that Mayor Adams is already zeroing in on those themes and coming after Mamdani, not just for being a Democratic socialist, but for how he would handle policing. In fact, my colleague Dan Manarino, speaking with Mayor Adams just after he declared this independent run, that'll be on our big Picks on Politics show. I'll also be an analyst on that show. You'll see a little bit of that interview you just saw right there. So go on and check that out. It airs at 6:30 tonight, Friday, and it'll have a re-air on Sunday morning. But for now, that'll do it for this edition of Picks on Politics Daily. I'm Henry Rossoff, wishing you a good day.
This is Picks on Politics Daily with Dan Manarino.
Hey everybody, I'm Dan Manarino. Welcome to Picks on Politics Daily. It's Friday, TGIF. It's August 8th. Let's talk about the race for New York City mayor. It is certainly heating up, all right? We are in the final few months before the big general election in November. And this week, there's really been this interesting conversation around the president, Donald Trump, and whether or not he had a phone call with former Governor Andrew Cuomo, mayoral candidate on the independent line, and whether or not the two of them had a conversation on how to defeat Zohran Mamdani, who is the Democratic nominee. Now, President Donald Trump came out and said that conversation never happened. Andrew Cuomo, the conversation never happened. Zohran Mamdani believes that it did. And he says he believes the New York Times reporting because they had 8 sources within their article talking about this conversation. I myself had a conversation with Andrew Cuomo recently, asking him when the last time he spoke to Donald Trump was. And he said, oh, I couldn't remember, after I was governor. And I said, well, after you were governor, how soon after? After I was governor. That's all he would really say. So they had a conversation, but he really doesn't remember when exactly it was or what it was about. He says it was certainly not about the race for New York City mayor. That's what he said recently. But Zohran Mamdani saying, okay, this is now what I'm up against. I'm up against former Governor Cuomo, who has a relationship with Donald Trump, against Mayor Adams, who has a relationship with Donald Trump, against Curtis Sliwa, who is a Republican, who has a relationship with Donald Trump. He's kind of picturing now, painting everybody as a relationship with President Donald Trump. So I had an opportunity this week to sit down with Zohran Mamdani. We had a very wide-ranging conversation. It's his first sit-down television interview since he got back from Uganda and since that shooting in Midtown Manhattan. And there was a lot to discuss about what he believes his path to victory is in a very unique election now where there's not just 2 candidates. There are many candidates on the ballot going into a general, one of them being a sitting mayor who says he's a Democrat but running as an independent. So we talked to him about that. We talked to him about affordability. We talked to him about policing, whether or not he believes New York City police officers deserve a raise. And then the conversation gets really interesting because, as you all know, and as we've been talking about, there's been a very interesting conversation around what the Democratic Party is, what it's looking to become. And in every single interview of any politician, they ask if they're supporting Zohran Mamdani. How does he feel that his name is in almost every interview and that some big-time Democrats like Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer have not yet fully endorsed him, and they're Democrats? Here's the interview. Mr. Mamdani, great to see you. Thanks for coming back to Picks on Politics.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Congratulations to you. I haven't spoken to you since the primary win, so it's good to have you here.
I appreciate that.
I want to talk about, this is your first sit-down interview since coming back from Uganda, since the Midtown shootings. There's a lot to talk about. And I want to talk about just kind of how you view this heading into the general election now. It's a very unique general election with many players. Who do you see as your real primary challenger going to November?
Donald Trump. You know, in many ways we have a number of different candidates, but 3 of them are Donald Trump's candidates. We have one that he is currently coordinating with in former Governor Andrew Cuomo, another that he's functionally bailed out of legal trouble in Mayor Eric Adams, and then another, Curtis Sliwa, who belongs to the same party as him, the Republican Party. And what we're seeing right now is that our president is currently investigating the option of interfering with this election, always working backwards from how best he could stop our campaign. Mm-hmm. And I understand why he's threatened, because of the fact that while he ran a campaign looking to deliver an easier and a lower cost of living for Americans, he's shown no interest in actually doing so, while we will actually deliver on this agenda.
You know, so looming over the election is Donald Trump, right? And there was this headline this week, and you just alluded to it in your answer right there, about this phone call between the president and Andrew Cuomo. The president denies it. Andrew Cuomo denies that phone call. And when I interviewed Andrew Cuomo recently, he said that he hadn't spoken to Donald Trump in quite some time. So why do you believe the story?
Because the New York Times stands by their reporting, and I trust them more than I trust Andrew Cuomo or Donald Trump. And with Andrew Cuomo, we don't even know what it means to hear quite some time or in a while. We know from this reporting that they continue to stand by that President Trump and Andrew Cuomo had a conversation, and that is a conversation about this mayor's race. And the very fact of it is a betrayal of New Yorkers, because in this very moment, that president has stolen food from the hungry across this country, has kicked millions of Americans, more than 1 million New Yorkers, off of their health care, and has done all of this in service of one of the largest wealth transfers from working class Americans to those who already have more money than they know what to do with.
So there is something to be said about the mayor of New York City having a relationship with the federal government and the president. Now, you said you'll be Donald Trump's worst nightmare. So how specifically, though, would you combat things like clawbacks of money or this threat that Donald Trump has said of a federal takeover of New York City? How would you combat that?
I would make the case at every single juncture about how this is not only an overreach beyond the roles and responsibilities of the federal government, but that this is something that New York will not stand for. Now, that is not to say you take a reflexive approach, always one of opposition with regards to the federal government. If Donald Trump wants to actually deliver on cheaper groceries and wants to work with me in doing so for New Yorkers, that's a phone conversation I'm willing to have.
Have you had one with him?
No, I haven't. I can tell you he hasn't called me and I haven't called him, because I am still running to defend this city first and foremost. And what offends me and so many New Yorkers is the premise of that phone call was not how can we benefit New Yorkers. The premise of it was Andrew Cuomo and Donald Trump speaking about how they can stop the Democratic nominee.
So a big part of you win in June was this focus on affordability, right? So I do want to talk about that, because it was right here on PIX11 when I sat down with Governor Hochul after your primary win, and it was her first time she actually said, it is a non-starter on raising taxes. That clip was played around the country, as you know, when you were on Meet the Press. Why do you believe you can change her mind when she says it's over?
Look, there are many people who called my campaign a non-starter when it began. We were polling at 1%, and now I speak to you having won the most votes of any Democratic nominee in New York City primary history. And so I'm confident in our ability to continue to build a coalition, much in the manner that we have. Because this isn't just about the moral imperative of making the city affordable. It's also an economic imperative. One of our hallmark signature platforms is to deliver universal childcare, cost of which is around $6 billion. Yeah. The city has lost about $23 billion in economic activity from the lack of affordable childcare in the last few years. That's nearly 4 times the cost of it. So what we're talking about here is also making the investments that will then aid our economy by aiding our people.
So do you say, when you say it's a non-starter, your campaign was a non-starter, now it obviously is, are you saying you could change her mind?
I'm confident in our ability to build a partnership with everyone, including the governor, in delivering this and in having the assistance of the legislature, which has time and time again shown its interest in these kinds of tax
You also
increases.
said the other day that, quote, the particulars are very much subject to negotiations in Albany, right? So it sounds like you're open to kind of moving and shifting, right? What is your contingency plan, though, if taxes aren't raised then? What does that negotiation look like?
Look, we put forward a revenue proposal that would raise $10 billion a year, $9 billion from 2 major revenue raisers, matching the state's top corporate tax rate to that of New Jersey.
But if you don't get that?
Yes, those are about $9 billion. We put that out there as the ideas that we felt were best suited to this. For example, however, in that same plan, $1 billion is within the city's control, right? Collecting more than $500 million in fines and fees. The city's currently owed $800 million by landlords in fines that the city has not collected. If the city reduced procurement costs by 1%, that would save $300 million. If the city hired the fiscal auditors that the independent budget office recommended, we'd raise more than $160 million a year. So there are many options on the table. My commitment is to the outcome, not the way that we get there, but that we deliver these things.
Okay, and Andrew Cuomo rolled out his plan for affordability to contrast yours. He says it will be catered towards transit and food programs specifically for low and income New Yorkers. He did this in front of a PowerPoint, right? And he said that yours is just too vast, a pie in the sky. Does he have a point, though, in terms of why should rich people get some of what you're offering?
You know, I've heard much of this before. I've even heard it from Andrew Cuomo, however, in the primary when he said that he was interested in exploring free buses in his own transportation proposal. We won a free bus pilot. We made 1 bus route free in each borough in New York City. Myself and Deputy Leader of the majority in the Senate, Mike Gianaris, delivered this. And what we saw is many said, are you going to subsidize transit for higher income New Yorkers? We saw, in fact, that the largest increase in ridership was amongst New Yorkers making $28,000 a year or less. Those are New Yorkers who are eligible for a means-tested program, much like the one he's proposing, called Fair Fares. less than 15% of those New Yorkers, all of whom were eligible, were enrolled in that program. And part of that is because when you ask working class New Yorkers to go through the same kind of bureaucracy that has failed them already, you will see so many of them never even start that process.
But are you saying with your plans then that somebody who does make a certain income would benefit from these programs? Somebody who is making the $1 million, somebody you want to raise the taxes on, do they benefit? Do they get to ride the bus for free? Do they get the universal child care?
This is for every New Yorker. And the mark of a successful part of a public good is that everyone uses it, even those who can afford the private sector. I mean, look at the way we treat our education system. Look at the way we treat universal pre-K. We are saying this is for every single New Yorker, and that's how we should be approaching so much of what we do.
The other big topic is public safety, and you're being criticized by your opponents and voters for past tweets and defund the police, calling the police racist, for example. Now, you've admittedly walked back some of these comments, and you've done so over the last couple interviews that you've talked about the evolution in your statements. But respectfully, how do you convince a New Yorker that this is not just an evolution because you're running for mayor?
You know, I asked New Yorkers to think about how they thought about this in the height of 2020, in a moment when many were feeling frustration after the murder of George Floyd, and the deep gap that we could see between safety and justice, and the need for us to be able to deliver on both of those things. And I have said throughout this campaign that it is clear that police are a partner in creating public safety and in showcasing to New Yorkers that we need not choose between those two things.
And evolutions of statements are fine, but politicians overall are criticized for evolving their positions. Are you okay with others in the race, for example, the mayor or Andrew Cuomo, evolving some of their positions just like you have?
I think it's important that any evolution be one that is sincere. And I think it is clear that we have to showcase that leadership also means listening. It also means learning. I can tell you that in the time of these last 5 years, as I have become an elected official and represented Astoria and Long Island City in the State Assembly, there is much that I have learned, much that has informed the way in which I lead this campaign and that I'm looking to lead this city, all of which still focused on the consistent themes that brought me to run for office in the first place. How do we make this a city that working class people can afford?
And a safe city, right? And
exactly.
So you said in a recent interview you have a big issue with forced overtime when it comes to the NYPD, that you're seeing 200 officers leave every single month and there's a retention problem. That comes down to money to a lot of these officers that I've spoken to. Are you in favor of giving the police officers a raise?
Look, I have said time and again that we need to make this a city that is affordable for each and every New Yorker, and that applies to all New Yorkers also who are working within our public sector.
But does that mean they should make more money?
I think that we need to make sure we are pursuing each and every avenue to increase retention and to make it such that we can actually have officers who do the jobs that they want to do.
But they want to know if they're getting, if you would give them a raise or not. And it comes down again to the sincerity of what you're talking about. Do you believe they deserve more money? I understand the affordability aspect, but just like teachers would get a raise, should the NYPD?
Look, there is much that you go through in contract negotiations with each and every union across this city. What I've said time and again is when we're looking at why 200 officers are leaving the department every month, one of the leading causes in that is forced overtime. And when we ask ourselves, how do we make it such that this is a job that is also one that we can actually perform, it comes back to the number of responsibilities we're putting on them.
And I want to talk, Mr. Mamdani, about this moment really in political history, right? Every single Democrat being interviewed, I know you've seen these interviews, are being asked, do you support Zohran Mamdani, right? Your name in every single interview. Some say yes, and some waffle on that answer, including Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries. What do you make of this moment? When you see some of those interviews playing out, what does it say about the Democratic Party if they won't say yes?
Look, I've been thankful to have conversations and meetings with leaders like Leader Jeffries, with Senator Schumer, with Governor Hochul. They've been productive, they've been fruitful, and I look forward to the partnership and the results that that partnership can deliver for New Yorkers. And what I've also said to New Yorkers is that in this moment, as we're looking at this race, we have the choice in many ways between ourselves and Donald Trump. That's what we see because of the fact of Donald Trump coordinating with one candidate, functionally bailing out another, and being in the same party as the third. And what we offer to New Yorkers is a vision that is laser focused on an economic agenda that will make the most expensive city in the United States affordable.
Yeah, across the river, a state you'd have to work very closely with, there's a race for governor of New Jersey. Mikey Sherrill's the congresswoman there. She's a centrist Democrat. There are many centrist Democrats looking at this race over here, very particular. Would you support her?
Absolutely.
And the reason I ask these questions about the political party is because when it comes to the midterms, and say you are the mayor, do you think folks are going to look at you and say it's either a plus or a minus for the Democratic Party? And how do you kind of come to reckon with that?
Look, we know that Republicans will look to focus on this city no matter who is in charge. We've seen that especially with the current mayor, who under indictment was facing so much of this same kind of focus across the country. What I'm excited by is the prospect of creating an example in this city of what it means to deliver for working people. When we make buses fast and free, when we freeze the rent, when we deliver universal childcare, let that be an example of what it means when Democrats actually get into office and deliver for working people.
Mr. Mamdani, I appreciate your time, as always, being back here on Picks and Politics. We'll talk to you soon, okay?
Thank you so much.
All right, that was Zohran Mamdani, one-on-one, and there are many more conversations we're going to have with the candidates along the way, heading up to Election Day. He kind of rounds out the last of of all the contenders that we've spoken to thus far. We spoke to every individual after the June primary. He was rounding that out. We're going to pick this back up in September, speaking to them all once again, so stay tuned for that. And of course, our Henry Rossoff is on the trail every single day, following these candidates, following the issues and what matters most to you. So stay tuned for all of that. And there's a lot more to come in the world of politics when it comes to New Jersey. We'll have much more on that to come. And in the meantime, Dan Manarino, have a great weekend. Mayor-elect, first time talking to you, so first off, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And you made some news today.
Yes.
Okay, so Jessica Tisch has announced she is staying on as police commissioner, something you said all along you wanted to happen. Take me through the conversations leading up to that very moment. Was it an immediate yes? Was there some negotiations that went into this?
So these are conversations that we've been having actively since the election now, more than 2 weeks ago. Conversations between the commissioner and myself, between our teams, and they've always come back to a shared goal of delivering public safety for New Yorkers. And the reason that I said over the course of the campaign, especially in the final weeks of the general election, about why I wanted to retain Commissioner Tisch, it always came back to the outcomes. This is someone who came into an NYPD that the current mayor had stacked with corruption and incompetence at the upper echelons of it, and she started to root that out, started to deliver accountability, and amidst that, also delivered historic drops in crime across the 5 boroughs. And that's what we're looking to build on under the Mamdani administration.
And when she says she's agreed to stay on, just help me understand that. Is she staying on for the full term? Is this a transitional period? What's it looking like time-wise?
The decisions I've made with personnel, whether it be with the commissioner, whether it be my chief of staff, my first deputy mayor, these are people that I am choosing to be a part of my administration. I'm not choosing to do so with an end date in mind.
So, obviously the choice, I'm hearing you listen very carefully on what you're unified on, but there are some disagreements that have been widely reported on. You and I have discussed them many times, right? So I want to go through a couple of them.
Please.
She openly has said she wants more police officers, and there is this whole talk right now that there could be a mass resignation once you take office. Have you discussed the number of officers? I know you say you want to stay the same, but if you lose some and she wants to bring on more, are you open to that?
I've said time and again that the amount that we had budgeted through the course of this campaign, that's the amount that we need in New York City. And frankly, the issue that we're facing is not the question of how many more officers we'll hire, but as you've said, how many officers we'll be able to keep. Because through the course of this last year, we've seen that the NYPD has a retention crisis. And it's a crisis that when you ask rank and file officers, it has less to do with the question of who the mayor is and more to do with the amount of work they're being asked to do. These are officers who signed up to do the work of policing. And yet they're often being asked to do the work of the mental health crisis or the work of the homelessness crisis. I mean, in a year alone, the NYPD will respond to 200,000 mental health calls. And so that's why, in addition to retaining Commissioner Tisch and building out an NYPD that is delivering public safety in the manner that we've seen under her, we're also going to be creating a Department of Community Safety that will be tasked with the mental health crisis, tasked with homelessness, tasked with a lot of the things that right now officers are being asked to do, because you can't separate the fact that in 2020, the police response time was less than 11 minutes. Today, it's closer to 16 minutes. A lot of this is because of everything we're asking them to do.
So how do you retain the officers? If you're not going to increase the numbers, how do you retain them? Do you pay them more?
I think the key thing here is you make sure they have a quality of life where they can actually do the work we're asking them to do. That means that you have the Department of Community Safety taking on mental health crisis, taking on homelessness. When you talk to officers, especially around the question of forced overtime, what happens is you have an officer who's told they have a few days off. They plan with their family for that time, and at the last minute they're told, take the first day, keep the third day, but you're going to come back on the second day. Obviously, that means that nothing can go forward as they'd hoped. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we're asking those officers to do the work that could be done elsewhere.
The police commissioner has also said that she wants the authority to discipline officers. You've said you want to pass that off now to the Civilian Complaint Review Board. What was that conversation with the police commissioner? Is she going to have final say for disciplinary action?
So when I've been speaking to the commissioner, but also when I've been speaking to New Yorkers, I speak about outcomes. And we talked about with the NYPD, Safety and justice is what we have to deliver, but also accountability.
Yeah.
And right now, what we see is that the CCRB has to deal with questions of petty politics and budget battles. You know, in 2024, under this current mayor, the CCRB had to drop at least 700 cases due to a lack of funding. And so what I've said, whether it be to the commissioner or to the people of the city, is that I'm going to put an end to that by fully funding the CCRB so that no longer are we having to question whether we can follow through on a case because we don't have the requisite amount of money.
So who has the final say?
Under the city charter right now, that's the commissioner. The question is, can the CCRB even follow through on the complaints? I'm going to make it my job to follow through on that by fully funding it.
But for the time being, she will have final say for disciplinary action until you figure out the funding issue.
Yes, that's within the city charter, and the funding issue has to do with whether the CCRB can actually take up the cases.
And I want to stay on the disagreements, just because I think it's so important, and you know you're going to get them. You get these questions. Yeah. Public safety is huge.
And
so
actually,
many
even
New Yorkers.
before you go on, I'll just say, disagreements are often cited as an issue within our politics, within our city hall, but I also think it's an example of the healthy kind of approach we have to delivering for New Yorkers. It's not to surround yourself with people who agree with you on every single thing. It's to surround yourself with people who are committed to excellence and outcomes.
Yeah, I think that people are going to look at it and say, well, how can you get to those positive outcomes of public safety if you disagree on things like the strategic response group? She wants to keep it, you want to get rid of it. Where did you land on that?
You know, I continue to have my concerns around the strategic response group because there are concerns around the fact of whether we can ensure that we're not only protecting New Yorkers, but also New Yorkers' ability to exercise their First Amendment rights. And I see with the commissioner a shared belief in the importance of that exercise, as well as being able to protect New Yorkers. And I think when you look at No Kings, the protest where we had tens of thousands of New Yorkers come out in the streets and voice their displeasure with the federal administration that has been going after them time and time again, we saw that that was not only an exercise of their First Amendment rights, but also something that they were able to do safely.
Yeah, this is fitting. While we talk about public safety, right? We hear the sirens going. So just to stay on that for a moment, the strategic response group, is it going away, or was that a negotiation that she wanted to keep it?
No, I've made clear my concerns. I don't think that the NYPD strategic response group should be how we respond to protests, and that's something that we'll be following through.
So it's going away?
We're going to have a different response, one that actually fulfills the objectives that we're talking about.
A lot can be said about how Eric Adams handled the NYPD, and Keyshawn Sewell was his first pick for police commissioner, and she left saying, well, I couldn't run the department how I wanted to. How do you plan to run the NYPD? Is it going to be fully her department? Are you hands-on approach? How did you leave that meeting and that agreement on who's going to run the day-to-day?
Frankly, the agreement and the meeting that I had with the commissioner is akin to the meetings and the agreements that I have with anyone that I'll be hiring, which is that I'm hiring to do their job. They should do their job. I should not be the one doing it. If that was the case, then I would simply be handling every single aspect of city business. And I'm also the mayor of this city. I'm responsible to the 8.5 million people. I'm accountable to them. And so I will be responsible in that way. I will be the one who has the final decision. And I'm also trusting the people that I hire to do their work.
So what did you leave? Did you give anything up from what you campaigned on to what she wanted? Was there something on the table that was negotiated upon to get her to stay?
You know, I spoke to the commissioner about the fact that I am looking to keep her in this position because of the work that she has done, not because of the idea that I have of overhauling all of it. It's about building that together. This is a commissioner who's shown that she's interested in accountability, in taking on corruption, in reducing crime. Those are three things that I'm very much interested in fulfilling and building upon. And the things that I've spoken about during the campaign, as much as we talk about differences of opinion, there's also a real shared alignment. Both the commissioner and I have an agreement on the fact that the police should not be asked to handle the fact that our social safety net is coming apart at the seams. That is a responsibility for city government, because the more that we ask officers to do that, the less that we can ask them to focus on that which New Yorkers want police officers to be dealing with, which is violent crime and serious crime.
Yeah, just to go back to the police officer thing, if you do face this mass resignation, John Shell was just on this panel the other day talking about, well, there's going to be 4,000 who leave on day one. If that happens, are you willing to hire that 4,000 back immediately?
So I don't even need to engage in the hypothetical because I don't see that happening. And I think there's been a lot of that kind of rhetoric about what will happen if I were to win, what will happen if I were to become the mayor. We're already seeing in the last few weeks alone that so much of that is actually being backpedaled on, as we're seeing that people are not leaving, people are committed to the city.
The announcement is coming a day after Tom Homan said in an interview that ICE is going to be back in New York City, that agents are going to be conducting operations and raids. Did you talk to the police commissioner about that fact that she was tipped off to that one in Lower Manhattan a couple weeks ago? And if that were to happen again, if she were tipped off, how would you want her to respond?
Well, what I've shared with the commissioner, and I've also shared publicly, is the fact that we can never go back to the days where Eric Adams would go on national television and open the door to the NYPD handling civil immigration enforcement. That can never even be entertained. The other day, I was speaking with a New Yorker who broke into tears as she told me about her aunt who had been visited by ICE at their home, at the school, at so many places of how she engaged with the world around her as a New Yorker. People are living in fear. And what we will ensure is the NYPD will be delivering public safety, not assisting ICE in their attempts to fulfill the administration's goal of creating the single largest deportation force in American history.
So if she is tipped off like she was, what do you want her to do?
I want her to ensure that no officers are assisting with the actions of ICE.
And what you did see play out a couple weeks ago, what is your response to Tom Homan, who yesterday said, we'll be back?
Yeah, I will tell Tom Homan what I will tell anyone who asks, which is the fact that I am looking forward to representing the entirety of this city. And this city is also an immigrant city. It's a city that's proud of its immigrants' heritage. It's proud of the fact that so many from across the world find their home in this city. And we will protect those New Yorkers as we protect every New Yorker.
You've really hit the ground running from the moment you won and to January 1st. It's a lot, right? To celebrate, but also take in the moment. And you're being pushed to have these meetings. One of them is with President Trump. I know you've said that you would like to meet with President Trump. How are those conversations going? Have you set a meeting up?
So we've reached out to set that meeting up. I don't have any more information on the dates or the time of it as yet, but I will be sure to share that as we do. And we reached out because we want to make the case for New Yorkers and the fact that I'm looking to represent each one of those New Yorkers and frankly their ability to afford this city, to be safe in this city. A lot of it has to do with how the federal government approaches this city.
You know, one thing that you know about very quickly is that New Yorkers don't have patience, right? And they want to know, what are you going to accomplish on day one? And so you are not going to have a lot of time to prove some of the things that are going to need the time to get done, right? So just for a New Yorker's sake, that you ran on 3 big agendas. It sounds like universal child care might be the first that gets done. Is that accurate? While you are firing on all cylinders, what's the first that might get accomplished?
Yeah, I think the first order of business will frankly be the Rent Guidelines Board and freezing the rent for more than 2 million rent-stabilized tenants. That is something that happens on an annual basis here in New York City. The other two, as you referred to, is making buses fast and free and delivering universal child care. And just this past week, I had a great meeting with the governor where we spoke about our shared focus on an affordability agenda and on universal child care particularly. And this is something that will take a period of time. These are all promises that I intend to keep over the time that I am mayor. And I also know that what they have the potential to do is transform New Yorkers' ability to live in the city. I mean, parents have to spend $22,500 a year for a single child. That's less money. That's more money than they would spend if that kid went to CUNY 18 years later.
You mentioned the Rent Guidelines Board. So let me go there for a second, because Mayor Adams, who right now is abroad, has said
Is he coming back?
He has a couple hours left before the charter kicks in. You know, it has been said that he wants to appoint people to the Rent Guidelines Board to kind of be a foil to that plan of freezing the rent. If he does go forward with that, with the appointments, how do you get around that to get what you need accomplished?
Well, I think the mayor will find that he'll have a tough time trying to stymie the momentum that we have as a campaign and as a movement, because more than 1 million New Yorkers came out to vote for our vision of making the city more affordable. I know that's difficult for the mayor because he ran an administration where for 4 years he made it more difficult for those New Yorkers to afford this city. And even one of the people that he floated appointing the Rent Guidelines Board is a star of a show that I think is called Selling New York, which is in some ways a description of what Eric Adams tried to do.
But if he does it, does that put a foil or at least a pause on freezing the rent?
I think it's an obstacle, but it's one that I think we can overcome.
You know, and the other one, you're talking about fast and free buses and you're meeting with the governor. I've heard you talk about many times that you don't want to take money away from the MTA. You want to put money back in. It's something that she agrees with, right? We don't want to take away money from the MTA. How are you getting that money, the $700 million to make the buses free, into the MTA if she's not for raising taxes?
You know, I think that the two clearest ways to raise that money is through the raising of the state's corporate tax to match that of New Jersey. I think that a lot of this is still a case to be made, whether it's the corporate tax or whether it's the personal income tax on those who make more than $1 million a year or more. I think that these are the clearest ways. I've also said that if there are other ways to raise this funding, the most important fact is that we fund it, not the question of how we do it, but that we do it.
Okay. But on the issue of raising the corporate tax, Stephen Fulop, the mayor of Jersey City, who is soon to be the head of the Partnership for New York, called it absolute suicide for New York City and an absolute dream for New Jersey. Have you spoken to Mr. Fulop?
I haven't spoken to Mr. Fulop, but I look forward to. And I've been in communication with the current leadership of the partnership, and I've appreciated the meetings that I've had. And I also appreciate and look forward to the meeting that I'll have with Mr. Fulop when he becomes the head of the partnership.
What do you think about what he said about the absolute suicide if you were to raise the corporate taxes, that corporations would leave?
I don't think that that would be the case. I think what we'd see is that by raising the top corporate tax on corporations that do business here, as opposed to just ones that are headquartered here, we'd find that this would raise the funding to make this city more affordable, which would also make it easier for those corporations to attract the top talent, who right now they're having a struggle to do so because of how expensive the city is.
The meeting that you would like to have that you haven't been able to have yet because he's not here is with Mayor Adams. Now, I've heard you say that the transition team is doing well in communications with theirs, and you appreciate that. But he did jet set off to Israel and now Uzbekistan, and he seems to be goading you while he's over there and fear-mongering a bit. And one of the things he said was parents should be fearful of their children living in New York City under your administration. What are you going to talk about when you have that meeting with him?
I'm going to make very clear the things that we need to actually fulfill this transition, because no matter political differences, which clearly are many, there is also the need to ensure that New Yorkers know that on January 1st there will be a smooth transition over, because people do not live their lives in accordance with the political calendar. The things they need on December 31st are what they need on January 1st, whether we're talking about the streets being cleaned or, people being able to wake up and know that their city is the same as it was. That requires a smooth transition. That's what we're going to focus on.
As you've seen, your election has created a lot of buzz. Now that the midterms are underway, that seems to be the focus, but your name is still being dragged into the midterms, right? Let me talk about Hakeem Jeffries for a moment, who now may face a challenge from Chi Osei, who is a member of the DSA. You said that there are local issues that Mr. Osei should be focused on, maybe should remain a councilman. Are you saying he should not run against Hakeem Jeffries?
No, I'm saying that I think the focus should be right here on New York City. I respect the work that Councilmember Osei has done in the council.
But what does that mean? Should he not run?
I think that right now is not the time to be engaging in that kind of a primary. I think the focus should be on delivering on this affordability agenda.
And what do you make of your name kind of being pulled into this? For example, Dan Goldman versus Brad Lander, and whether or not that's going to be a thing with Alexa Aviles, who is a member of the DSA. Folks saying, well, Mr. Mamdani is going to support Mr. Lander. Does he have your support?
I haven't made any formal endorsements in any of these races. And I think, I had the other day someone reach out to me and say, I didn't know you were considering that person for a commissioner. And I was like, I didn't know I was either. There's a lot of things that I'll read in the newspaper, which will be news to me as well.
Yeah.
And I think what New Yorkers should know is that every day I wake up and I think about the affordability agenda. I think there will always be an attempt to make it a story about something else. But the most important thing is, can New Yorkers afford this city?
Do you see it as a moment for the DSA as a whole, as they now chart to challenge some of these institutionalized names? Do you see it as a moment?
I think the moment in this time right now for members of New York City DSA and New Yorkers across the 5 boroughs is the opportunity to fulfill the agenda that brought so many into politics, which is, how do we make life easier for working people? That's what has animated so many for so long. Now the difference is we have the opportunity to deliver on it.
And a couple rapid fire, because I know we're nearing the end here. I know you've been asked this a million times. Are you moving into Gracie Mansion? And when will you make the determination?
I have to make that decision with my wife, but as soon as we do, we will let you know.
If you don't, are you staying in that 1 bedroom?
That's probably where I would be if I didn't go, but we haven't made any decisions yet.
And then also for the swearing in, do you have any plans on where that's going to be and who's going to be there?
I have to be honest, I don't even know what I'm doing in the next 30 minutes. So I don't know.
I know what you're doing.
I don't know about the swearing in as yet.
And lastly, I got to get in a question, because this is big. I know you're a soccer fan.
Yes.
World Cup. I'm also a soccer fan. By the way, highest scorer in my county when I was a kid.
Oh my goodness.
In New Jersey, and not to brag.
High school?
No. Talking Pee-wees. Okay, but for World Cup, are you going to go, and do you want the tickets to be affordable?
Yes, I want the tickets to be affordable, because I think what we're seeing is that for too many New Yorkers, their dream of seeing the World Cup means going to the closest screen that they can find, because they can't even think about affording the tickets. I saw a report recently, there are some stadiums that are charging around $150 for a parking ticket.
So how do you get around that?
I mean, this is the issue. I think I've been pushing FIFA for the fact that we should not only not have dynamic pricing, but we should also have set-asides at a discount for those who live in the area, which they've had in previous World Cups. But I love the World Cup. I look forward to the World Cup. I just want it to be something that New Yorkers can feel and enjoy.
Understood. Mr. Mamdani, appreciate your time.
Thank you, my friend.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for taking some time to sit with us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for coming.
It's 1 week since your inauguration. There's a lot happening. Let's hop into it with the joint child care announcement that you just had with Governor Kathy Hochul, fixing 3K and expanding child care to 2-year-olds over the next 4 years, about 2,000 seats by the fall, you're promising. When will every New Yorker have a seat for their 2-year-old if they want it?
By the end of this term. By the end of my first term as the mayor of New York City, every single 2-year-old will have a seat. And what we are doing right now is fulfilling the dream at the heart of the campaign we just ran, which was about delivering universal child care for New Yorkers. And today, the governor and I stood together as we announced a $1.21 billion commitment. And as you said, it's not just about delivering child care for 2-year-olds, it's also about fixing child care for 3-year-olds, because there have been families with a 3-year-old who've been offered a seat only to find out that while they live in Flatbush, the seat is in Astoria. And what we want to do is actually make it possible for them to take that seat, use that seat, and that's what these fixes are going to make real.
Why expand in this way? And let me explain what I mean.
Please.
I'm a parent of 2 young boys I'm raising in Brooklyn, and generally what we do, a lot of my parent friends try to do, is keep people at the same daycare from, let's say, 6 months all the way up till 3K. So why just begin by expanding only 2-year seats as opposed to expanding babies all the way to 2s all at one time?
So we've been doing a number of investigations and also conversations internally within our city government, and found that the best way to fulfill universal child care is by staggering the implementation and aging it down. And we have 3K in this city, child care for 3-year-olds that we're not only fixing, but to actually bring that also to child care for 2-year-olds. And then to continue to build that out so that children as young as 6 weeks can have child care without parents having to worry about $22,500 a year as an expense.
Also happening today, you have Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem in town on the heels of this fatal shooting in Minneapolis with an ICE agent that has a lot of attention right now. But she called you out directly, which is what I want you to respond to. Quote, "He is standing with illegal people who've broken our laws before putting New York City first." Your response?
Well, I'm not sure what she's actually referring to in that statement, because what I've been doing is standing up for each and every New Yorker across this city as the mayor of this city. And what I will not do, however, is differentiate New Yorkers on the basis of their documentation. If you live here, I am your mayor. And that is what we have been showing over these last 8 days, is a commitment to making this city more affordable for every single person who calls it home.
Her primary focus here in town was talking about the takedown of dozens of people she says are in the country illegally and affiliated with gangs. And she also encouraged you and the NYPD to work with them on those criminal prosecution efforts. Will your NYPD work with ICE on that level?
My NYPD will follow the law here in New York City. And the law as we have it with our sanctuary city policies allows for city government to work with the federal administration when it comes to 170 or so serious crimes if someone has been convicted of them. What it does not allow for, however, is civil enforcement or the assistance of a federal administration's attempt to fulfill its pledge to create the single largest deportation force in American history. And what I've said directly to the president, as well as what I've said to New Yorkers across the city, is that these ICE raids, they are cruel and inhumane. They do nothing to actually further the cause of public safety.
And on the issue of people protesting these ICE raids, especially after what happened in Minneapolis, we've already seen smaller protests. I believe a bigger one's actually planned for this evening. Will the strategic response group within the NYPD still be responding to protests? I know you've had some serious concerns about this, but obviously not a lot of time yet to implement that change.
I continue to share those concerns around the strategic response groups, and I continue to be committed to creating a new police response to the exercising of First Amendment rights. And what it comes back to is that this was a unit that was created initially to respond as part of counterterrorism efforts. That does not need to be conflated with the response to New Yorkers using their First Amendment rights. And so what we need to do is both keep those rights as a sanctity in New York City and keep New Yorkers safe, and I'm confident we'll be able to do that.
But as of right now tonight, there's a big protest. Will the SRG be out there because that's the option right now?
The first response that we'll have from the NYPD will be that of community affairs.
On buses, we actually just sat down with the governor today. As you know, we were just talking about this before we got going. One of the things she said, notably on buses, unlike childcare, is she doesn't seem ready to move on it yet. She said it's not going to be in her State of the State address next week. It's not going to be in her budget. But she's not closing the door. Are you willing to wait a year if she says maybe next year, or are you going to move forward with some version of free buses before then?
I'm always going to advocate for our agenda, and the fact of it is that this is a critical issue because 1 in 5 New Yorkers couldn't afford to ride the bus, and that was before it was $3. So what we need to do is show those New Yorkers that they still have a place in this city, and I'll always keep making the case to our governor and to everyone in this city as to why that's an important thing.
But how do you do something without her support on this particular issue at the intersection of the MTA? In your budget, do you say, here's the money, let's do it now?
Well, I think some of this is a hypothetical that I hope not to arrive to. And I will keep making that case because we're very early in the budget process. And I also think what New Yorkers want to see is the continued fulfillment of the agenda. And today's a great day to be chatting with you because that's what we did with childcare, and now we continue to do it with the other promises of freezing the rent for rent-stabilized tenants and making buses fast and free.
On housing, and I promise there's a more direct housing question coming because I know this has been arguably your first move in office. Right after the inauguration, you went and you passed a number or signed a number of executive orders, but you also appointed Sia Weaver to the Office of Tenant Protections. She compared home ownership as a tool of white supremacy. You said you would keep her on because of the good work that you feel that she is doing. But what do you think of the comment itself, drawing a line between landlords and white supremacists?
Obviously, that's not an opinion that I share. And I made the decision to have her as our executive director of the Mayor's Office to Protect Tenants, not because of her comments, but because of her work. She is someone who has won significant victories for tenants, not just in New York City, but across the entirety of the state, formative part of what was an upstate, downstate coalition. And we've seen her already hard at work in this past week. She's someone who has been a core part of our efforts to coordinate rental ripoff hearings across the city, as well as informing tenants of their rights in a city where oftentimes they're not made aware of them.
You've been focused a lot on tenant protection and building new housing. What efforts has your office already made on reaching out to distressed landlords, particularly rent control, or those with rent control units that say they're distressed, that they want to help you in your mission to lower rents and stabilize rents, but they just can't afford their buildings right now?
So this is a key part of the portfolio of our Deputy Mayor for Housing and Planning, Layla Bozarg. And in addition to putting together what is our housing plan over the course of this year, she is also hard at work at developing out how we can both provide relief to tenants and also address whatever issues that landlords may have.
On mental health, an issue we haven't heard too much from you yet, and I get it, it's been a week, so right. You know, how soon can you get things done, right? But you've talked about having essentially a small army of community health professionals at outposts around the city. When will we see a launch of that initiative?
So that is something that is currently the subject of discussions within our city hall and our city government. What I can tell you is we've already begun interviews for positions within the Department of Community Safety, and this continues to be a focus for us because while we celebrate the record drops in a number of serious crime categories here in New York City, we also know that we need to make it such that police officers can focus on policing and not have to respond to 200,000 mental health calls on an annual basis. That's at the heart of the Department of Community Safety. It's a commitment to addressing the mental health crisis as well as the homelessness crisis in the city.
In the interim, and you were talking about this at police headquarters the other day, will police continue to respond to the majority of mental health calls, at least at this point?
I think in the interim, as we set this up, we will continue with the policies that we have while always asking ourselves, what else can we do, even as we are building a more medium and long-term strategy.
You spoke with the president after what happened in Venezuela with Nicolas Maduro brought here to New York City. Why did you choose that to be your first call to him as mayor, as opposed to, let's say, something that's happening with ICE right now, or an infrastructure project that many New Yorkers may feel on a broader scale? Why Venezuela?
Well, I wanted to make clear to the president directly that these were the thoughts that I had, and they were also the thoughts that I was about to share with the world. And this is not just an action taken by a federal administration abroad, it's also an action that then implicates New York City. Because right now, Nicolas Maduro is here in New York City, and my job as the mayor of New York City is to ensure that any federal action has a limited impact, if any, on the day-to-day lives of New Yorkers.
Do you feel he was receptive to some of the concerns you expressed? Was it a productive conversation, or did he hear you and say, thanks, goodbye? How did it go?
It was a direct conversation where I shared exactly how I felt, and it was a brief one where we both understood exactly where we stood, and I appreciated that.
On anti-Semitism, you undid a change Mayor Adams made to change the definition of anti-Semitism, and the change you made was to say that certain forms of criticizing Israel can be construed as anti-Semitism. You, and in fact many Jews themselves, don't necessarily agree with that. My question is this, though. Do you plan on rolling out your own executive order on anti-Semitism, some of the things you'd like to see done, and a definition that you think is more acceptable?
You know, I think at the core of this has to be the work that we actually do. And that work is going to be typified by the way in which we actually combat anti-Semitism. In another executive order, we showcased our commitment to retain the mayor's office to combat anti-Semitism. We've also spoken about commitments to increase hate crime prevention programming by 800%, because too often our response to anti-Semitism is after the fact, as opposed to thinking about preemptively what we can do to prevent it. And I think, as you said, the definition that the previous mayor, had instituted through an executive order was one that even the individual who wrote that definition in the first place had real concerns about whether it could ever be workable. And we want to make sure that we take on the crisis of anti-Semitism and we don't diminish it by conflating it with legitimate critique of the state of Israel.
About a minute left here, so one more serious question and then a fun one at the end. But writ large, you used a lot of executive orders so far, more in the first week than Mayor Adams did in the first 3 months. Is there any concern that you're expanding executive power in a way that New Yorkers may not like, that they just see you doing it without the state or without the city council? Is that a consideration as you sign these executive orders?
What I've actually seen is that New Yorkers are hungry for a city government that moves at the pace that they do. And we're seeing that for far too long, we've treated the tools within government as something that could gather dust as opposed to something that should be used to make life easier and more affordable in the nation's most expensive city. And I'm proud of the fact that in 8 days, we've issued more than 11 executive orders because it's part and parcel of an administration that's hitting the ground running.
Let's talk about bagels, my favorite food.
Come on.
You mentioned them during the inauguration. You said only in a city like New York could a Muslim kid like you grow up eating bagels and lox on Sunday. So now, as the mayor of New York, what makes for a great bagel?
Okay. I mean, my favorite kind of bagel is a bagel and lox. And I also I'm a sucker of pairing it with some pulp. Tropicana is just how I grew up. I have to tell you that recently I had a bagel and lox from Apollo Bagels, not too far from here. Very good.
Yeah? What about as far as like, are you looking for like crackly outside or a little softer or a denser inside? What as far as the bagel itself?
I'm looking for crackle, I would say.
I am too, and I can't find a good one.
I grew up poppy seed bagel, scallion cream cheese, absolute bagels. I know they've reopened under new management. I'm excited to try it out. But I think, to me, you can't really tell the story of New York City without telling the story of our bagels.
So I'll have to give Apollo a try. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
9:34 right now, and Mayor Zohran Mamdani has painted a grim picture for New York City's budget, which now has a $12 billion budget deficit to fill. Mayor Mamdani pointing the finger at previous administrations while saying that he will deliver an on-time, balanced budget on February 17th. So the question is, how? The mayor is joining me now live to talk about this and make an announcement. Mr. Mayor, great to see you.
Great to see you as well. Thank you for having me.
Of course, and great to have you here in studio. I think this is your first as mayor, so it's great to have you here. And before we get to the announcement and the budget, I do want to talk about what we saw play out in Brooklyn last night at the synagogue there. Any indication, as the investigation plays out, that that individual is looking to commit a hate crime?
So it's currently being investigated. And I have to say, I was there on the scene last night at 770 Chabad World Headquarters, and it was a horrifying incident where a man repeatedly and intentionally crashed his car into the building. And I am so thankful that no one was hurt. And we know that this is a building that has immense meaning to so many Jewish New Yorkers and those across the world. And yesterday's attack also took place on the yard site of Rabbi Schneerson and the leadership of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. And this is just a day after the day when we remember the victims of the Holocaust. Right. And we know that anti-Semitism is not simply something of the past to be learned about. It is a living, breathing thing that we have to combat every day.
Today, the City Council is expected to announce a task force to fight anti-Semitism. And the question is for you is, have you found somebody to lead your own office to combat anti-Semitism within the mayor's office? When can we expect to see that up and running?
So we are actually in our final interviews for that position. And that is going to be a key position that delivers on our commitment to root out anti-Semitism across the 5 boroughs and make this a city where Jewish New Yorkers are not just safe, but frankly celebrated and cherished.
Sometime next week?
We're working on the timeline, but it is in the final stages.
Okay, Mr. Mayor. And you are here today to talk about the big announcement, which is a $12 billion deficit. You said the city has not seen something like this since the Great Depression. You said you were given a poison chalice by previous administrations. So on behalf of so many New Yorkers who heard that noise and that news, what is the answer to bring that budget now on time and on budget?
So I think first, as you said, this is a $12 billion fiscal deficit, right? The last time New Yorkers saw a fiscal crisis anywhere close to this was the Great Recession. And yet this actually eclipses that. This is of a greater deficit than we saw at that time. It's going to require an all-of-the-above approach. So we've said it will require the city's relationship with the state changing. What I mean by that is today, the city contributes 54.5% of the state's revenue, receives 40.5% in return. The second is going to require a relationship change between the city and its wealthiest residents and most profitable corporations. I've spoken a lot with you across New York City about how I think we should raise income taxes on those who make $1 million or more by 2%, how we should raise corporate taxes on the most profitable corporations. The third thing it's also going to require is the city pursuing savings and efficiencies within its own operating budget. And so that is something that I'm actually here to speak to you today about also, is the creation of savings officers within every single agency that will be tasked with assessing the efficacy of programs we have, the efficiencies that we currently have or are being denied, and what steps we need to take to make the kinds of changes to bring us back to a firm financial.
And you want that done yesterday, so you have an executive order that you're calling all city agencies to do right now and implementing and appointing these chief savings officers.
Yes, and that's actually the executive order that I have with me right here. This is a directive that within 5 days, every single agency head has to identify a chief savings officer, and then within 45 days, those officers have to come back to us with a full assessment of the savings that could be pursued, the efficiencies that we're currently seeing, and the programs that frankly need to be sunsetted or are not effective.
Okay, so go ahead, put your John Hancock on that. And that will become officially an executive order as of this moment, right?
Yes, this is now an executive order, the first to be signed on PIX11.
There we go. So let me ask you what exactly that means. The previous administration, Eric Adams, he cut from city agencies. For example, libraries were cut, right? Are you expecting agencies to look at some of these things and implement cuts, and how soon?
I think what we're first talking about are efficiencies and savings. We're talking about the things that we could be doing better.
But is that semantics?
Cuts, no, I would say cuts are a matter of last resort, right? We do not want to be cutting the services that New Yorkers are relying on. If the state does not change its relationship to the city, if it does not raise taxes on the wealthiest New Yorkers or the most profitable corporations, then all it leaves the city with are the most painful tools. However, we want to do everything we can to ensure that those are not the tools we have to use.
But cuts could be on the table as a last resort.
That is what we are left with if we are not able to change these relationships. That's why we're pursuing the relationship.
You talked a lot about Eric Adams and former Governor Andrew Cuomo, but the City Council was also involved in the budget-making process. Governor Kathy Hochul had 4 years to kind of implement some changes to Governor Cuomo's budgets. Do you look at that as part of the reason we're in this crisis, that there was failure on all levels?
I see the architects of this crisis as being the prior mayor and the prior governor. I think that there have been steps taken in the past few years, especially under Governor Hochul's leadership, to change some of that cost sharing between the city and the state. It's not been an exercise in cruelty towards the city coffers that we saw for about a decade. However, there's more that needs to be done. And what we have now for the first time in a long time is a directive from our own city hall, from myself, to go to Albany and be honest and direct about what we need from Albany. That's what we're going to do.
What about President Trump? Does he play a part in this crisis?
Well, I think President Trump has said himself in the Oval Office right after we had a meeting that the better New York City does, the happier he is. And what we've seen is that right now New York City is in need of a change in its fiscal relationship with a number of the things I've listed, but also needs to be protected from some of the federal policies that are being put forward. And I've been honest about the fact that some of these proposals, they would devastate our city, and we're going to fight them with everything that we have.
In the last couple days or weeks, have you had a conversation with President Trump about what he's willing to send to New York or withhold from New York as you go into the budget talks and negotiations now? Knowing what you're going to get from the federal government is huge. So have you spoken to the president?
So I keep those conversations between the president and myself private. What I will tell you, however,
when's the last time you spoke
is, look, those are conversations that will always come back to New York City.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that New Yorkers are expecting from me. And what they also know is that in a city of 8.5 million people, the wealthiest city in the wealthiest country in the world, we have 1 in 4 living in poverty. We have to find fiscal policy that lifts us all up.
What is your contingency? As you made that announcement, an hour later, Governor Hochul came out and she said, newsflash, we're not raising taxes in New York. So you had these conversations with the governor a number of times. You're very complimentary to her, but she is adamant that they're not raising taxes. So if you don't get that money, what is the contingency?
Well, I think the first key thing is to make clear to New Yorkers why we need that money, how we got to this place. And some of this are the structural imbalances we've seen in our city's fiscal health over many years. It would be all too easy to try and fix this budget only to get here next year. That's why we're looking for solutions that will last in the longer term, recurring ones, annualized ones. And so we're talking about these increased taxes on the wealthy.
She
we're talking
said no.
about this. Look, I think politics is also an exercise in making the case and making clear what the stakes are, right? The tools that the city has, these are the most painful tools. We are talking about cuts, we are talking about property taxes, the things that I do not want to pursue.
Yeah.
And yet the scale of this fiscal crisis of $12 billion, this is not an ordinary crisis. This is not a mayor coming forward and saying it's going to be a tough budget. This is the likes of which we haven't seen since the Great Recession. That requires an all-of-the-above approach. That's what we're going to make clear.
So realistic talk, and you mentioned yesterday a number of times that you want to be really honest with New Yorkers and letting them know how we got to this point and what you're planning to do about it. But there's also a lot that you campaigned on, freezing the rent, fast and free buses. Could some of that take longer to implement, realistically talking, because of what we're seeing?
I think this is a fiscal crisis that has to be front of mind for all of us. Now, I'm proud of the fact that we've already been able to advance our affordability agenda in the 1 month I've been in office. Day 8, we secured more than $1 billion for universal child care. Freezing the rent is not something that requires a fiscal infusion. It's a decision from the Rent Guidelines Board. Making buses fast and free, the fast thing we're already getting started on. And what I've said is that by the time I'm finished being mayor, they're going to be free. What we have to deliver, however, in this very year, required by law, but also required just by being a good mayor, a balanced budget for this fiscal year, for the next fiscal year.
I'm up against the clock here, but yesterday you mentioned an AI chatbot that cost $500,000 as one of the things you thought was a waste of money. Can you name something else?
That's exactly what this directive is about. What we want is to actually come to a number after looking at the budget, because what we're seeing, we're talking about a budget of more than $115 billion. Right? If I'm going to accuse the prior mayor of gross fiscal mismanagement in the budgeting process, we know that that likely extends to the expense side as well. And so we're going to look through every agency to find every example, because when we're going to ask New Yorkers to commit themselves to a new era of politics, we have to commit ourselves to. That's what this is about.
If the governor comes up and says, you know what, Mr. Mayor, I don't want to raise the taxes, but I do want to find money. We made all this money from Wall Street, which he said, and we found some money for you to give to you. Would that satisfy you?
I think that given the scale of this crisis, that's not going to be a way to cover the entirety of it. Look, I'll be direct with you.
Yeah.
We're encouraged by the results from Wall Street, by the news of bonuses. That would be something, if the deficit was smaller, I could say maybe this could cover it. But $12 billion, there's no news of bonuses or better forecasts that are going to get there. It's going to require everything.
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate you coming here, talking straight with the New Yorkers, signing the executive order. I think it's the first that we've had here at PIX11 where legislation is signed right here on our air. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
You want to go do the weather?
Yeah.
No? Okay.
Stay warm, stay inside, stay safe.
There you go. Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. Hazel, over to you.